Welcome, everyone, this evening in Israel and afternoon, East Coast time. I'm Lydia Morgan, JIJ's Chief Operating Officer. We are now at day 18 of Operation Swords of Iron. As of this morning, October 24th, as many as 1,400 Israelis were murdered, more than 5,240 injured. There have been 7,750 rockets fired at Israel, and 222 families have been notified that their loved ones are confirmed hostages. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and reservists are on the front line, including some of our team, their spouses, and my son John. They are facing an unprecedented attack, making our support more critical than ever. You can see here some of the faces of the hostages.
Lydia, I just want to cut in here and follow up on a really critical point from our webinar that we discussed last week. As we were wrapping up, we were talking about how many of the rockets that Hamas fires in Gaza fall short and they land on civilians. And only a few hours after that webinar, one of their rockets indeed landed on the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza. And Hamas, of course, immediately blamed Israel. And the world media, unfortunately, rushed to take their word for it. And what happened was that riots broke out instantly in Hebron, in Ramallah, in Turkey, in Egypt, New York, London, and all over the world. And there has been a massive upsurge of hate crimes and anti-Semitism. Jewish people who don't even live in Israel are being targeted as a result of this misinformation and propaganda. It only took a few hours for Israel and the United States to produce rock-solid intelligence showing that the rockets did indeed originate from either Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And what was so tough to see was that when apparently it was Israel's fault, the casualty numbers were 500 people. But as soon as it was Hamas's fault, the casualty numbers started getting revised down into only the dozens. And then pictures were shown that it was a strike on a parking lot, not a hospital. It was a parking lot near the hospital. I just want everybody who's listening to keep in perspective. When you hear statistics from the so-called Gaza Health Ministry, you need to remember that this organization is Hamas. So I just had to cut in there, Lydia. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you, Monique. I appreciate that. It's important for everybody to know and to be aware of really what is happening. We're not sure what news you are hearing where you are. We have another critical update, one that is we are thankful for. Yesterday, 2 more hostages were released. That brings the number to 4 hostages released out of 224. They spent 17 days in captivity, and they have been identified, as you can see here, as Norit Cooper, age 79, and Yaakov Lifshitz, who is 85. They were released from Gaza into Egypt late Monday night and last night, and were transferred to the IDF. They were then brought to a hospital for examination. Both of their husbands are believed to still be held by Hamas. So when you hear what they're saying on the news, when you hear dialogue around this, keep that in mind, please. Okay. Some of the international hostage negotiators have been pursuing cynical strategy of getting only certain categories of hostages released, like foreign nationals, children, elderly. Unfortunately, this is reminiscent of the Nazi selection process, in which Jewish people were unloaded from cattle cars, and soldiers would send some to work and some to the gas showers. JIJ's position is clear. We want you to hear this loud and clear. We will not stop pushing for the release of the hostages until every last one is home. No exceptions. Doesn't matter the nationality, doesn't matter the dual citizenship, doesn't matter age, until every single one is home. At this point, I'd like to invite Flavia Sivald, our CEO, to share about what's happening on the ground here in Israel.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. Israel has a massive internal displacement crisis. So we have around 500,000 people evacuated from their homes in the north and in the south due to the war. So there are only 56,000 hotel rooms in Israel which are full. For so many families, a hotel room is their long-term temporary home. And these families are separated because with fathers and sons and brothers deployed in the reserve, mothers cooped up indoors with their children and no formal schooling. The communities have taken empty areas in the hotels to organize some type of schooling. There is also an economic crisis, and the tourism industry, obviously, it is at a complete standstill. Most businesses are short-staffed because their employees are on the front lines or have to stay home with their children and the elderly. And also, food prices are skyrocketing. Food in the fields is not getting harvested. So there are people that are volunteering even in the weekends to help. But still, there is a strong sense of unity in our society, and we are, yes, growing weary, and we are all deep grieving in our own ways at the same time. We heard together, it was yesterday, that forensic pathologists and volunteers from Zaka, which is a volunteer-based organization that works in disaster situations to identify victims, and is dedicated to gather bodies and body parts, even spilled blood, to bring all human remains to proper burial. And that's a Jewish mitzvah. These volunteers have been sharing detailed stories and testimonies about the horrible atrocities that Hamas did to so many civilians. And as I was watching this video, there were testimonies of terrible torture to children, pulling eyes, killing families in front of each other, burning together 20 people and children. These testimonies are real and heartbreaking. But we all have to share them to spread the truth, to see what really happened. This is part of the updates that we have today.
Thank you, Flavia. It is brutally hard to hear these stories. It's here in Israel, we are hearing and sharing them with each other repeatedly, daily. You come into work, you're online in the evening, and oh my God, did you see this? Oh, I heard this, it can't possibly be real. And then you see the pictures or the videos. It has taken an immense toll on all of us. Again, we're not sure what you're hearing. We're not sure if you're hearing the truth, the atrocities that have been committed. As human rights advocates, as hard as it is our duty to bear witness to the worst atrocities visited upon our people since the Holocaust. We are, though, human beings, and we have our limits too. In the midst of this grief, we have been engaged in a blizzard of advocacy efforts over these last 2 weeks of war. And our goal today is to bring you up to speed on our efforts so that you can partner with us effectively. Since the first day of the war, we have had 3 major goals. to secure the release of every single hostage, to cut off all sources of funding for Hamas, and to pursue justice for all of the victims. To help you understand how we are reaching these goals and going after these targets here, I'd like to open a conversation with two of our human rights lawyers on staff, Ori and Monique. Advocate Ori Morad is the head of our International Law and Public Diplomacy Department. He's an Israeli, a lawyer, and a veteran of several of the previous Gaza wars. Welcome, Ori. Monique Beadle
Thank you for having me.
Monique Beadle is our new advancement director. She's an American Jewish human rights attorney and the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. Welcome, Monique, also.
Thanks, Lydia.
Ori, some of your team are currently in Geneva for high-level meetings with the Israeli ambassador to the UN, the head of the International Red Cross, and some of our NGO partners. What has the team learned through these meetings, and what do you see happening in the next 1 or 2 weeks?
So I think first we need to, I think it's very essential to understand who we're actually working with, because you've mentioned the ICRC, we're working with the United Nations, with the special mission of Israel, the embassy of Israel in Geneva. And I think it's essential for everybody to understand who we're dealing with, who is the UN, and how you can actually characterize the UN's attitude towards Israel. And the UN in particular, which the United Nations is the biggest human rights IGO in the world. His mandate is to promote and protect human rights, and over more than 70 years, the relationship that the state of Israel had with the United Nations can be characterized with bias, with hypocrisy. They're obsessed with the state of Israel. The number of condemnations and the numbers of resolutions passed against the state of Israel, comparing to all the rest of the countries in the world, is out of proportion completely. And that is a fundamental thing to understand before we actually engage with those kinds of functions. So again, the United Nations is very hostile towards Israel, and not even the horrors that we witnessed on the October 7th actually changed anything on that term. Very important to highlight as well. And that is actually, for me, that is precisely why it's ultra important for us, for the JIJ as a human rights organization that holds special consultative status and is able to advocate from Geneva, from New York, from where everything is actually going on. It's essential for us to be there in these difficult times. And I can tell you that probably next week, maybe at the end of next week, the Human Rights Council in Geneva is going to convene for a special session to discuss the situation in Israel and in Gaza. And that is basically initiated by a coalition of Muslim countries. And the goal is very simple, basically. They want to condemn Israel. That's the idea. The whole session is mainly, purely to condemn another condemnation and follow them by resolution against the state of Israel. And for us, again, as an organization that holds that special consultative status, it's very important for us to be there. And what we intend to do is to be in the hall itself and to defend Israel from within. And this is what we do relentlessly in the past few years. And that's, for us, that is a crucial time to increase our efforts. And that's what we intend to do. And our dear Carolina, and advocate Carolina Grimberg-Golichov, is already in Geneva, already doing a lot of things to promote the release of the hostages. She already met, and she intends to meet with the legal advisors and the ICRC team. The International Red Cross was situated in Geneva. And we actually intend to be there when the session is going to happen next week. And we're going to speak on behalf of the hostages. And we're even bringing a family with us to Geneva. And we're going to give them our slot of 90 seconds that is given to us as an organization that holds that status. And we're going to allow them to speak on behalf of JIJ, on behalf of the families of the hostages, because we're not going to give up on that issue. And this is where we actually put in our chips at the moment. That's as far as the UN and on Geneva side.
Thank you, Uri. The whole team is behind you. We are all working round the clock, editing, drafting, researching, and we're glad that Carolina is there at the forefront, doing a lot of the legwork for this. Monique, you are based in New York, and you are building our presence at the UN headquarters there. What is the top priority now for our US team?
So top priority for us in UN headquarters, so that our audience understands the major organs in New York are the Security Council and the General Assembly. At the Security Council, we do have some friends. Linda Thomas Greenfield is the US ambassador to the UN. And last week, she made a very forceful push within the UN Security Council, upholding Israel's right to self-defense. So we're working right now to ask her to make sure that the UN Security Council designates Hamas as a terrorist organization. The US and the European Union already designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. And it's critical that they do that. It's not just a statement. It's not just a resolution. It actually has teeth, the idea of a designation. When a government designates an entity as a terrorist organization, it means that none of our money can touch them. And it means that there are whole buildings full of lawyers in Washington, D.C. and in Brussels that are supposed to make sure that money from the U.S. and the EU doesn't go into the hands of terrorists who are committed to the destruction of our free societies. Now, the fact that the UN still has not designated Hamas as a terrorist organization is a glaring loophole. And here's why. The United States provides 25% of the United Nations funding. We are the very biggest donor to the United Nations. And because the UN doesn't designate Hamas, it means that the UN organizations that operate in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, they can hire affiliates of Hamas to be on their staff. They can send money to Hamas-affiliated charities. The money that the U.S. is giving to the UN is still ending up in the hands of Hamas. So we have to close this loophole, and that's really the strongest piece of our focus today. So just yesterday, I was meeting with the staff members of a U.S. senator who is very dedicated to standing with Israel, and he's open to taking the lead on this issue and making a coordinated request with many U.S. senators on both sides of the aisle. It's really important that this is a bipartisan initiative, to go to Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield and say, please demand that the UN Security Council designates Hamas as a terrorist organization. The reason why is because any money that we give to humanitarian aid in Gaza is inevitably going to end up in the hands of Hamas unless we close this loophole.
Very clear. Thank you, Monique. Uri, we're also making a big push within the European Union this week. Please tell our viewers why that is so important.
Maybe before we start, let me just mention that the EU has already designated Hamas as a terrorist group, and they're basically playing a double game. So while Hamas is on the terrorist list for the EU, the money still flows. And that is for us very important to cut that source of funding for Hamas immediately. But maybe before we jump into that, maybe just a quick reminder, because actually 2 days after the attack happened on the 7th, and then 2 days afterwards on the 9th, the EU actually announced that it's stopping the aid to the Palestinians in order actually to review. That's what they argue, that they want to review the policies before they issuing any other more payments to the Palestinians. And at the same day, actually only 5 hours later, the decision was reversed. And the next day, the European Commission decided to triple the funding to the Palestinians, and basically the war was still on. They're still butchering people in Kfar Aza and in Kibbutz Be'eri, but at the same time, they triple the funding to the Palestinians without making sure, it's very, very important to bold that, but without making sure that the money goes to the right hands. because we know that Hamas is actually funneling the money for years, and that is something that we wanted to make sure that stops. So the European Parliament actually is pushing against that reversal of that decision and made a resolution, a very important resolution. I have to admit that it was a bit surprising and it was unprecedented actually, and demanding the change of the way that the Palestinians receive the European money. And we are now, JIJ is leading a very wide coalition of a lot of organizations to push the EU to stop the funding to Hamas through their so-called charitable payments. And that's what we put our focus at the moment. For us, it's very, very important. We're already receiving a lot of great support from a lot of other organizations. And we intend tomorrow to start, or maybe to push even further, with sending another request to stop the funding. And we know that that is something that they're going to take very seriously.
Thank you, Uri. I think it would also help our partners and viewers to understand better why we're opposed to more aid to the Palestinians. We see on the news, we see everywhere, aren't they really suffering in Gaza? Isn't it callous to be opposed to aid coming in to relieve their suffering? Help us understand that.
So first, I have to admit, I don't disagree that they are suffering. There are civilians that
Yes.
they are suffering. It's a matter of fact, and it's for me very understandable. Definitely, as people who work in the field of human rights, and we see people. So it's for me very understandable that we want to help when we see people suffering. But alongside that, we need to understand that Hamas, again and again, over the years, simply steals that aid. Everything that enters into the Gaza Strip, Hamas is taking control over it. So while the intentions are good, the outcome is completely the opposite, because it straightens Hamas. It helps them to buy more ammunition. It helps them to makes them stronger. And instead of the money going to the right hands, to humanitarian needs, it goes to the hands of Hamas. It goes to paying salaries. It goes to paying to buy more missiles and rockets and so on and so forth. So, for example, actually, just 2 days ago, on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, 20 trucks with humanitarian aid entered to the Gaza Strip through Rafah, through the Egyptian border, through Rafah to the Gaza Strip, and they were on the way, allegedly, to Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital is the biggest hospital in the Gaza Strip, by the way, where Hamas's leaders actually hide underneath. And I don't know if someone wants to make a guess how much from that 20 trucks and the things that were on it came to the right hands. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Hamas put their filthy hands on that 20 trucks and steal the whole thing. So that is why we're not against, in principle, I have to say, we're not against humanitarian aid. The point is that we need to make sure, including the US, the Egyptians, the UN, Israel, Qatar, the Europeans, and everybody that is involved in this story, to make sure that everything that goes in the Gaza Strip will end up in the right hands. And I think that it's far from being there now at the moment, because maybe another reason that Israel actually opposed that is that Israel wants to be able to monitor what actually is in those trucks. And it's very limited, which means potentially we're allowing more ammunition going in. So while the whole world thinks that we're now helping through humanitarian corridor to send more drugs and more medicine and stuff, or food, it ends up in the hands of Hamas. And that is crucial to understand. And that is basically why Israel is against that, or at least making sure that the mechanisms or the ways that humanitarian aid will go into Gaza will end up in the right hands.
Thank you, Uri. Yes, we know the reality is that many times when the construction materials are sent to build water pipes, by the way, Israel is only responsible. You hear the news, Israel shut off the water to Gaza. They're all, you know, suffering because they don't have water. Israel's responsible for only 10% of the water. The rest of the
to be
water,
precise, 7%
7.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Uri. And there were pipelines for water. Hamas has dug up those pipes and they have used them to build rockets that they fire at Israel. That is the reality.
Same thing, by the way, sorry for cutting you, but same thing happens with electricity as well. Hamas was responsible, I think it was 3 days after the war started, actually. They damaged the sources of the electricity that we send and supply to the Gaza Strip. And of course, the whole world comes to Israel and say, Israel, why are you not allowing the Gazans to have, to have electricity more than an hour a day? And people don't understand it. And I think that is something that everybody needs to understand.
Thank you. And it's not just us that are talking about it. We do have, Monique, if you can play for us. It's a recording. People of Gaza that are getting desperate, absolutely desperate. And they are confiding with some IDF investigators as to what happens, just like Uri said, what happens to the aid. Monique, if you could play that for us, please.
بالنسبة لموضوع المساعدات اللي بتوصل بيتم عملها يعني مع حماس، للأسف هاي المساعدات ما بيتم توزيعها بشكل عادل. توزيع المساعدات بيتم بشكل عنصري، بحيث انه افراد حماس فقط هم اللي بيتلقوا المساعدات، بالاضافه الى انه احنا شفنا المساعدات هاي تباع في الاسواق بيع، يعني نلاقي معلبات مكتوب على العلبه ليست للبيع. طب هاي مساعده جايه مجانيه من جهه اطراف حبت تساعد الشعب الفلسطيني، كيف بيتم بيعها؟ لما رحنا نراجع التجار بحكي لك التجار لا يا عمي احنا شريناها شري من حماس، احنا دفعنا حقها فلوس واحنا بنسترد الفلوس اللي احنا دفعناها لحماس. بالنسبه لموضوع العلاج الصحي، عائله من عائلات حماس كان يتم تفضيلهم على الاخرين في موضوع العلاج، يعني انه هو له الاولويه بحق العلاج اكثر من الاشخاص الاخرين. اذا كان شخص محتاج لعمليه صحيه بيتم تاجيل موعده لاشعار اخر حتى يتم علاج الاشخاص الموجودين من دائره حماس المقربه. وهذا الامر كثير ناس بتعاني منه. صراحه حماس دمرت الشعب الفلسطيني بشكل كبير جدا، حتى كمان تعمل عمليه ابتزاز لبعض الاشخاص. لذلك نحن بنهيب بالمجتمع الخارجي انه اذا هو بده يحاول انه يساعد الشعب الفلسطيني يساعده من خلال قنوات دوليه ما تتحكم فيها حماس ابدا ابدا ابدا، وتخلي هذا الشعب محاصر ومكلوم على امره. يا ريت صوتنا يصل هيك للجهات الخارجيه، وبتمنى هذا الكلام.
Those are some sobering statistics that we saw there. Half of Gaza lives in poverty. Half. Flavia, in everything that we've been doing and in all of our internal discussions, a key point we keep coming back to, it's in our face, it's on our social media, it's an urgency within us, is we have to make the hostages our top priority. We have been working very extensively and intensively to push the International Red Cross to do its part on this issue. Many of you signed the petition, many of you of our viewers tonight, thank you. Please continue to share that petition. You can find that on our website. You can also find it on our Facebook page. Flavia, what are the practical ways that the JIJ team is continuing to help not just the families of the hostages, but those that from Faraza and Berry and those that have been evacuated from the south, and now they've been evacuated from the north also? What is the JIJ team doing in a practical way?
Yes, we care very much about what is happening here locally inside Israel as well, not just pushing for the international arena. We always work in a dual way in our legal team that provides on a regular basis free legal aid, also has opened their time to provide free legal aid for the evacuated families from the south that are in really a crisis type situation. So our lawyers help them navigate the national social security issues of funding that the government provides, drafting wills, long-term power of attorney, and many other needs as they come up. The minute you advertise that is free legal aid, then of course people need it, and it's something, as we know from the ongoing work, is life-saving and is life-changing and strengthening those families, and they need every help they can.
Thank you, Flavia.
I want to cut in before we switch to Q&A, because we've just spent the last half an hour or so laying out a really targeted set of legal strategies that we've been pursuing. And I think it's worth mentioning that having a team that's this adept and this sophisticated and this multinational is very, very special, and that it's worth supporting and that it's worth doing so very generously. We've really been so touched by the outpouring of support from our supporters across the globe, and we so appreciate all of you who are standing with us in this time of crisis. But if you haven't yet made a donation to support the work of JIJ, then now really is the time to do it. I'll put the link up here on the screen so everyone can see it, but you can go to either this link or JIJ.org. So please consider making a very generous donation to our Israel Crisis Fund. We've made clear we've done a blizzard of advocacy efforts just in the last 2 weeks, but we're committed to remaining involved in the long term and just pursuing our 3 critical goals. It's the release of all the hostages, no more funding for Hamas, and justice for all of the victims. So please consider making a generous donation today. And Lydia, probably we should go to Q&A at this point. What do you think?
Absolutely. Let's take, please send your questions also. Okay, how do we get our point across as US citizens that we want the UN to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization? Do we contact Linda Thomas Greenfield? Remind us again who she is, please. And do we write our congressman again? And what do we say?
So right now, the effort that we're pursuing is to get the United States Senate and multiple US senators to sign a letter to Linda Thomas Greenfield asking her to do this. We think that will have greater impact than just us as one NGO. And so if you could contact your senator, not your Congress, not your House of Representatives person, but your senator. And it's especially important to target your senator if you go on their website and see that they're on the Foreign Affairs Committee or an Intelligence Committee or a Defense Committee, because their voices are heard in a special way by the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. And again, that's Linda Thomas Greenfield. She is the U.S. Ambassador to the UN. I will say, if you reach out to her personally, if you have a personal connection with her, get in touch with me and let's leverage that. But when you reach out to her, please begin with a note of thanks, because up to this time, she is standing with the state of Israel. So we don't want to beat up on her. We just want to urge her that this is a critical piece of her advocacy and her commitment to standing with Israel.
Thank you, Monique. Yes, it's important to make sure that we are thanking those that are standing with us, that are delivering the message very clearly that Israel does have a legitimate standing as a nation, the homeland for the Jewish people, and the right to defend herself. We have another question here. Can you please share the dates and times? We'll send this to Uri. The JIJ will be at the UN next week, and also share any links to petitions or fundraisers regarding the current hostage situation so that we can share with our communities. Uri, please.
So yes, of course, we're going to share it as soon as we're going to have them. The petitions, of course, we can share it with you guys. But in terms of exact days of things that are happening in the UN, we need to wait a few more days. We're going to get the exact days from them, and we're going to share it with you.
Thank you, Uri. Also, that was Ashley, I think. You can go to our website as well, as I mentioned earlier, and look for the petition. You can sign the petition. There will be another 1 or 2 letters coming out later that you can sign your name to. And let's move to the next question. Why isn't your voice heard more in the American media? Go, Monique.
Because we're just getting started in building out our US team. That's the honest answer. I just joined the team 2 weeks ago. There were some offers to get us into US media last week. It's always very fluid. We welcome opportunities to amplify this message in the US media. And really, like, the more support we get from our donors and our friends, the more we're able to hire and collaborate with really skilled media professionals. In fact, next week, I'm headed to DC to meet with a senior producer of Fox News to talk about how we can get shape some of the talking points that the usual talking heads talk about, and also how we can sort of amplify these messages and make sure that this critical message about stopping the funding for Hamas and closing all these loopholes, it's really critical that the American people understand this, because it's their own money that's on the line.
This is a tough one. What's the solution to making sure the help and resources to Gaza are not confiscated by Hamas? Actually, it's kind of simple. Go ahead, Uri. Uri, can you take that question? Do you want me to repeat it? Uri is frozen. Uri is frozen. Flavia, you want to take that one? What's the solution to making sure the help and resources coming into Gaza are not confiscated by Hamas?
First of all, I want to say that after October 7, it's very hard as Israelis that have been through the worst massacre of our people since the Holocaust to even think of the possibility of Hamas still governing the Palestinian people in Gaza. I think the Palestinians themselves, the civilian people, would themselves prefer a government that they can elect, that really can take care of their needs and is not just interested in taking most of their funding to attack Israel. Don't forget, just from the October 7, we had more than 7,750, I think, since yesterday, from yesterday's numbers that were fired towards Israel, towards a civilian population here in Israel. And also those same missiles, a third of them goes down, or a quarter of them goes down in Gaza itself, hurting Palestinian and killing Palestinian people. This happens all the time as much. So the Palestinian people are being used as a pawn by Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas is a terrorist organization that compares or worse than ISIS. So we are talking about terrorists that are ruling civilians, and for that reason, as Israelis, and that's why Israel is doing this attack on Hamas. It's not an attack on the Palestinian in Gaza. It's an attack on the organization Hamas and its terrorist militants, and it's to not only to provide safeguard to the Israeli people, but also eventually, and we believe that it will help Palestinians restructure themselves with a different leadership, and it's our hope. And also by doing that, it won't be necessary to control every last little thing that goes in or out of Gaza, and have other powers like Iran trying to destroy Israel control those efforts as well. That's the hope. So it's as long as Hamas is governing, is the power that is hurting the Palestinian people, and it's is actually damaging them, then there is no way to really control where the humanitarian aid goes to.
I think it's critically important, and one of our viewers is bringing this up in the comments, that when the Islamic State took over large swaths of Iraq and Syria, the people suffered, and the U.S. response to it was necessary to destroy the Islamic State and their stranglehold on the civilians of Iraq and Syria, and the actions that the United States military had to take in order to go in and root them out of Mosul and Raqqa, which is where they had their headquarters for, I think, like 2 to 4 years, were extremely difficult, and it were extremely grueling battles, and there was a suffering of civilians. What the U.S. understood at that time was that sending in humanitarian aid and giving it to the Islamic State and expecting them to distribute it to their people was it was a losing game. So this is the unfortunate reality of what's happening in Gaza. What the people of Iraq have now benefited from, now that the Islamic State is gone, is that they can begin rebuilding their society. Another point that just has to be taken into consideration is that it's not, Hamas has, and the Palestinian Authority have inculcated really self-defeating ideology into their own people. This ideology of one day Israel's going to magically vanish. One day we're going to succeed and we're going to be able to throw all the Jews into the sea. And this obsession with martyrdom and cultivating into children an interest in a sense of complete hopelessness. And the answer to that is to go blow themselves up and try to hurt Jews in the process. It's honestly reminiscent of some of the ideologies that were cultivated within the Axis powers during World War II, within the citizenry. And the only way that peace was made in the aftermath of World War II was that those ideologies had to be destroyed in the people of Germany and in the people of Japan. We've seen that the people of Germany went through a decades-long process of basically what, from a Jewish perspective, is tshuva, is repentance. And they said, we were dead wrong. What we did was horrible. We never should have participated in it. And we're going to now educate our children proactively so that we make sure that we never do this again. And the same is true in Japan. They completely abandoned the self-defeating ideology. And unfortunately, that's what it's going to take in order for there to be long-term peace between the people of Israel and the people of Gaza.
Thank you, Monique. and for Flavia for answering that question. Let's take one more. Doctors Without Borders and other medical humanitarian organizations specify that Israel has sufficient medical care. They say Israel doesn't need medical care. They have what they need. Therefore, for many years, Doctors Without Borders and other humanitarian organizations have focused their attention on Palestinians. Does Hamas allow them to give Palestinians care? So that's question one. And number two, does Israel in fact have sufficient medical care right now for those that have recently been injured or are still being injured as the rockets continue to fall? Who would like to answer that from the
Lydia,
team?
I'll take a stab at this, and then it'd be good to hear from you guys who actually live there. But this is a hard one to answer because the subtext of this line is that, like, oh, look at those rich Jews and all the resources they have. They're so powerful and they should give it to the people who are killing them. And the truth is that Israel has given these resources to the people who have been killing us. Yahya Sinwar, who is one of the leaders of Hamas, was given life-saving free surgery in the state of Israel. And the state of Israel gives permits to the civilians of Gaza and even some of the militants of Hamas to come into Israel and receive free medical care. The dramatic realignment that's happening in Israeli society right now is that there's no more appetite for that anymore. Basically, the feeling is, look what we got for all of the help that we gave. We thought that we were promoting peace and trust and providing economic incentives to have normalcy, and instead we got the worst pogrom since the Holocaust. So I don't think there's going to be any appetite any longer for the Israeli health system to be providing medical care to Hamas terrorists or their leadership any longer. I think that's a natural result. Lydia and Uri, maybe you guys can share, like, your sense of how the hospitals of Israel are dealing with the influx of so many injured right now.
I'm sorry, guys. My baby is just screaming endlessly. Just an interesting anecdote in that thing. You've mentioned Monique Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza. Worth mentioning is the fact that Israel was the one who actually saved Yahya Sinwar's life. Yahya Sinwar sat in Israeli jail for over 20 years. He was responsible for the release of 1,027 terrorists from an Israeli jail, and during his sentence here, sitting in Israeli jail, he was found with a brain cancer, and Israel took him to an hospital in Beersheba, in the southern, in the Israeli Negev, and just simply operated him and saved his life. This is one anecdote that is interesting to mention. Maybe one more thing that is just one more thing that is very interesting to know is that the same civilians who lived, at least lived in Nir Oz and in Kibbutz Re'im, in Kibbutz Be'eri, all those places where Hamas terrorists butchered them, they were the ones who helped, per se, Gazans from the Gaza Strip to enter into Israel and get medical care, the best medical care they can ever dream of. So that is, I'm not sure that is, I wouldn't with you in terms of the question, but I'm just to add something interesting to that point. But
the fact that we are resented for developing a world-class healthcare system, that fact that this can be used as a cudgel against our people by the international community, after our people have invented patents and medications and solutions to all of the medical issues in the world, it just galls me to the depths of my bones.
Same. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please send us your questions. It's easier to answer them by email. Send them to contact us, that's contact us at jij.org.il. We will do our best to answer them. A couple of you asked questions in previous webinars, and once we close the webinar, I'm sorry to say, the questions disappear. So please, if we did not answer your question, let us know. And keep getting out there, keep sharing the petition. Use your voice, contact your government officials. Ori, pick up your baby. It's okay. She's adorable. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And God bless you. Keep praying. Pray for peace.